The fluorescent lights inside Hargrove Regional Medical Center hummed like a generator running on its last fuse. Nobody looked twice at the woman pushing the cleaning cart down Corridor 7. And that was exactly the way she wanted it. Mara Voss moved quietly, kept her eyes down, let people talk past her like she wasn't there. Dr. Clement Rourke had called her dead weight in scrubs that morning, loud enough for 3 residents to hear, and she hadn't flinched. What nobody in that hospital understood was that Mara Voss had operated in places where flinching got people killed. Then the radio crackled. 12 critical inbounds, highway pileup, ETA 4 minutes. And suddenly, Hargrove Regional had no one who could save them. Before this story goes any further, if you're already hooked, follow my channel so you don't miss how this ends. Hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The morning had started the way most mornings started at Hargrove Regional, with someone taking credit for something they didn't do. Dr. Clement Rourke arrived at 7:45, 12 minutes after he was supposed to, and walked straight past the nursing station without acknowledging the overnight staff who had been running the floor since midnight. He was the kind of doctor who entered a room and immediately changed its temperature, not because of competence, but because of the particular way he carried himself. Like a man who had decided early in life that confidence and arrogance were the same thing and had never been corrected. "Where's the Delacroix chart?" he said to no one in particular, dropping his bag on the nearest counter. Nurse Priya Okafor pulled it from the rack without looking up. "Right there, Dr. Rourke, updated at 6. He took it, scanned 2 lines, set it down. "Someone's been writing notes in the margins again. I've told you people, these charts go to litigation. Keep them clean." "That was Dr. Fenwick's notation from the 3 a.m. consult," Priya said carefully. "Then tell Fenwick to use a separate sheet." He moved on without waiting for a response, already scanning the board for his first case. That was the moment Mara came around the corner with the cleaning cart. She was wearing the pale gray uniform that facilities staff wore, a shade lighter than the nursing scrubs, carefully designed so that everyone knew, at a glance, that the person wearing it was not clinical. She had a plastic badge clipped to her breast pocket that said, Mara Va, Environmental Services, with a small photo that made her look like anyone. Average height, brown hair pulled back, unremarkable in the way that only people who have worked very hard at being unremarkable actually achieve. She was heading toward the supply alcove when Rourke noticed her. "Hey." He said it the way people say it when they don't actually know someone's name and don't feel the need to learn it. "There's a spill outside Bay 4. A patient knocked over a cup. Get that before someone goes down." Mara stopped the cart. "I'll get it after I restock the alcove. No, now." Rourke had already looked away. "That's what you're here for." The hallway went a little quiet. 2 residents standing near the nursing station found something interesting on their clipboards. Priya kept her eyes on her computer screen, but her jaw tightened. Mara didn't argue. She turned the cart around and went to Bay 4. This was not the first time. It wasn't the 5th. Rourke had a way of finding her in whatever part of the hospital she was working and redirecting her. Not because the tasks were urgent, but because redirecting her seemed to satisfy something in him. She had been at Hargrove Regional for 6 weeks. In that time, she had cleaned up spills, restocked supply rooms, mopped corridors, and been told twice by Rourke, in front of other staff, that she needed to stay in her lane. What she had not done, in 6 weeks, was introduce herself to anyone as anything other than the woman who ran the cleaning cart. She crouched beside the spill, someone's cup of juice, orange, already spreading toward the wall, and worked efficiently, the way she did everything. No wasted motion. Clean the center first, then the edges, one direction. Don't spread it. She had learned that in a place that wasn't a hospital. "You know he's going to keep doing that," said a voice behind her. She looked up. A young man in a medical student's white coat was leaning against the wall, watching. He looked about 25, with the specific look of someone who had not slept properly since September. His badge said, Theo Marsh. Oskultraj. MS3. "Keep doing what?" Mara said, pointing you at things. "Using you like I don't know, like you're there to absorb friction." He paused. "Sorry, that was a weird way to phrase it." It was accurate. "He does it to nurses too," Theo said, "and to residents when he thinks he can get away with it. There's a complaint chain, but it moves slowly and nobody..." He stopped himself. Sorry, you probably don't need me explaining hospital politics. I've been in worse environments, Mara said. She stood, wrung out the mop head, repositioned the cart. Theo looked at her for a second like he was trying to figure out what that meant, then gave up. I'm Theo. I know. Your badge. Right. He pushed off the wall. I'm sorry about him. For what it's worth. It's worth something, she said, and moved on. By 10 in the morning, the ER had the low-grade buzz it always carried on weekdays. Not the controlled silence of a slow night, not the flat-out noise of a mass casualty event, but something in between. Steady. 3 trauma bays active, 2 waiting on labs. The radio in the nurse's station cycling through routine traffic. Mara was in the corridor outside the ER when she heard Rourke's voice carry through the door. I'm not having this argument again, Priya. The patient goes to imaging first, then cardiology reviews. That's the order. The cardiologist wants to see her before imaging. Those were her exact words. And I'm the attending, which means my order stands. Get imaging on the phone. Mara kept moving. It wasn't her business. She had understood that clearly from her first week. Her role at Hargrove was narrowly defined, and anything outside that narrow definition was both professionally prohibited and personally dangerous. She had not taken this job because she wanted it. She had taken it because it was the lowest visibility position she could find in a mid-sized city with a regional trauma center, and she needed to be near a trauma center for reasons she had told herself she would explain later, to herself, when she had more distance from what had happened before. She had not gotten more distance. She had gotten 6 weeks of linoleum floors and Clement Rourke. She was restocking the supply alcove at 11:15 when she heard it, or felt it more accurately. A change in the building's rhythm, the specific frequency that comes right before a system gets overwhelmed. The radio crackled at the nurse's station. Hargrove, this is Mercy County Dispatch. Multiple vehicle incident, Highway 9 interchange. We have 12 critical, 8 serious, 4 walking. First wave inbound, 4 minutes. Trauma team activation requested. Then everything moved at once. The overhead PA called it. Trauma team activation, ER. The sound was familiar to Mara in a way that didn't come from 6 weeks at a hospital. She stood in the alcove doorway and watched the corridor shift into a different mode. Nurses pulling crash carts, residents breaking toward the ER, the charge nurse getting on the phone. Rourke came around the corner at a half jog, already issuing instructions. I want all 4 bays cleared and prepped. Get anesthesia on standby. Where's Fenwick? In surgery, someone called back. Who's the backup attending? Dr. Hale's not in until 3. Rourke stopped, a beat of silence that said more than his usual performance. Who else do we have? 2 residents, the MS3 team. You. He gathered himself quickly. Mara noticed the recovery, noticed what it covered. Fine. Get me Larkin from anesthesia and the full trauma kit for Bay 1. Let's move. She pushed the cart back against the wall and stood to the side as the team swept past. Nobody looked at her. She was furniture. She listened to the radio. The first ambulance was 3 minutes out, 12 critical, highway pile-up, likely multiple ejections from the description, blunt force polytrauma across the board. A hospital this size, on a weekday late morning, with 1 attending and 2 residents covering emergency, those numbers were not going to work out clean. She knew what the math looked like. She had done this math in a different country, in different clothes, with a different name. She pushed the cart to the far end of the corridor and parked it against the wall, out of the path of the incoming traffic. Then she stood there and waited, because that was what she was supposed to do, Chad. The first 3 patients came through the doors in a controlled rush. Paramedics giving rapid handoffs, trauma nurses taking vital signs before the gurney stopped rolling, Rourke moving between bays with the focused authority he wore like a coat. Mara watched through the ER's interior window from the hallway. She could see Bay 1, Bay 2, partially Bay 3. She could see the monitors, the lines being established, the residents reading from the paramedic sheets. The 4th patient came through at a different velocity. She could tell from the paramedic's voice, which went flat in the way that voices go flat when someone is explaining a situation they don't fully believe yet. Male, mid-40s, unrestrained driver, significant thoracic trauma, airway is compromised. We've got partial intubation, but Bay 2, Rourke said, pointing. Dr. Rourke, the airway is Bay 2. Go. The gurney hit the bay and the team converged. Mara watched the monitor readings from where she stood. She couldn't hear every word, but she knew what declining numbers looked like, and she knew what people's bodies looked like when they were working against a problem they couldn't solve. 60 seconds later, a resident came out of Bay 2 at a pace that wasn't a walk. "Dr. Rourke, the intubation isn't holding. The anatomy's wrong. They're swelling. We can't visualize." Rourke's voice from inside Bay 1. "Get Larkin." "Larkin's in Bay 3. A pause. Then, "I'm coming." Mara was already at the ER door. She stopped herself with one hand on the frame. She had been very clear with herself about what this situation required. She had been clear for 6 weeks. Her job was the cart and the corridor, and anything outside that was a violation of an arrangement she had no choice but to honor. The phone in her locker, not her phone technically, a device she had been issued before everything changed, had been silent for 6 weeks, which meant the arrangement was still in place, which meant she stayed invisible. But she could hear the monitor alarm changing pitch. She pushed the door open and walked into the ER. Nobody noticed her immediately. The bay was crowded, Rourke now at the head of the bed, the resident to his right, a nurse managing the IV lines, another watching the monitor. The laryngoscope was in Rourke's hand. His face had the particular expression of a man who is trying to make his hands do something his hands do not want to do. "I can't visualize," he said, more quietly than he probably intended. "There's edema superior to the cords," the resident said. "The anatomy hit. I can see that. A beat. Get me a videoscope." "We tried. It's... Get it anyway." The monitor climbed, then broke into the rhythm that means a different kind of emergency is beginning. Mara was standing at the bay entrance. She did a rapid assessment that she had been trained to complete in 4 seconds under worse conditions than these. Facial trauma with soft tissue swelling, supraglottic edema likely secondary to direct blow. Standard intubation route was closed. The patient's coloring was changing. She had maybe 90 seconds before the window closed. "Dr. Rourke." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise the way certain voices do. He looked up. His expression went through several things quickly: recognition, irritation, confusion. "What are you doing in here? The airway's gone supraglottic. You need a surgical airway." The resident stared at her. Rourke's jaw tightened. "Get her out of here." "He has about a minute," Mara said. She wasn't raising her voice. "Maybe less." "Get her out." The monitor alarm changed pitch again. Nobody moved to remove her because everyone in the room was looking at the monitor and doing the same calculation. "Dr. Rourke," Priya's voice from the monitor station. "Careful. Sats are at 71. Rourke looked at the patient, looked at the laryngoscope in his hand. His knuckles were pale. She could see from where she stood that his hands were not entirely steady, and she thought, not unkindly, that this was probably the moment he had been managing against his entire career, the moment the room exceeded what he could actually do. "Give me the kit," Mara said. "You are a facilities employee," Rourke said, each word separate and contained like he was defining the perimeter of a space. "I know what I am," she said. "Give me the kit." The resident, without looking at Rourke, without asking permission, the way young people sometimes do the right thing because they haven't been in institutions long enough to learn how not to, held out the surgical airway kit. Mara took it. She moved to the head of the bed, with the efficiency of someone who has done this without adequate lighting, without a proper table, without 4 people standing around watching. She pulled on gloves, the resident had already broken the package open, and identified landmarks by touch and visual inspection in the same motion, the way you do when there is no time to make it 2 separate steps. "Someone hold pressure on either side," she said. "Not there. 2 centimeters inferior. Good." "Rourke said her name," said Mara, in a tone that might have been warning or might have been something else. She didn't evaluate it because she was past the point where it mattered. The room had gone the particular quality of quiet that comes when everyone present understands they are watching something that has already been decided. She made the incision. She had done this 16 times in her career at various points on a scale from controlled to completely improvised. This one was controlled. She located the cricothyroid membrane, and her hands were steady because she had trained her hands to be steady in situations that made this look comfortable. And she worked through each step at a pace that was fast but not rushed, which is a distinction that takes years to learn. She placed the tube. She connected the bag. The resident squeezed. The chest rose. She watched the monitor. 71, 73. The line changed direction. 78, 82, 86. Good breath sounds bilaterally, Priya said, stethoscope on the patient's chest, her voice doing something complicated. The alarm stopped. The room held itself in a stillness that lasted about 3 seconds, which was approximately how long it took Clement Rourke to find the version of himself that came next. Step away from the patient, he said. His voice was controlled again. That particular controlled tone that isn't calm. It's reconstruction. She recognized it. She had heard it from people in worse situations than his. Mara stepped back. She stripped the gloves. She looked at the patient's chest rising and falling with steady, even breaths, and felt the thing she always felt in these moments. Not pride exactly, more like the closing of a circuit, a system returning to function. She turned to face Rourke. His expression was not gratitude. It was not even neutrality. It was the look of a man whose authority has been visibly interrupted by a woman with a cleaning cart badge, in front of his residents and his nurses, on a day when 12 critical patients were filling his emergency department and the margin for looking competent had already been thin. I want her badge pulled, he said to no one specific. Today. Priya didn't move. Theo, who had come in at some point during the procedure and was standing near the bay entrance, also didn't move. The resident who had handed Mara the kit was looking at the patient. His SATs are holding at 91, someone said quietly. I said I want her out of this department, Rourke said, louder. Mara didn't argue. She didn't explain. She walked back to the bay entrance, stepped into the corridor, and went back to the cart she had left against the wall. She stood there with both hands on the handle. Through the ER window, she could see the controlled chaos continuing, the other patients, the other bays, the ongoing work of a hospital that had too much coming through its doors. She could see Rourke in Bay 2, reorganized, giving orders, his face pointed away from her now. She had known, when she walked through that door, what it would cost. She had calculated it the way she calculated everything, not in terms of fairness or what she deserved or what was right, but in terms of what the situation required against what it would take from her. The patient in Bay 2 was breathing. That was what the situation had required. What it was going to take from her, she would find out soon enough. Her cart stood exactly where she had left it. The alcove still needed restocking. There were 4 more hours on her shift. She picked up the handle and pushed the cart forward, and behind her, through the window, she could see Rourke already on the phone, his posture telling her everything she needed to know about what that call was about. Somewhere outside the building, on the highway that fed into the city, the rest of the ambulances were still coming. The rest of the shift moved the way bad shifts always move, too fast and too slow at the same time, the minutes stretching in the wrong places and collapsing in the ones where you needed them to hold. Mara restocked the alcove. She mopped the stretch of corridor outside radiology, where a gurney wheel had tracked something dark and wet from the ambulance bay. She refilled the soap dispensers in the staff bathroom on the 2nd floor, working her way through the checklist on her clipboard with the same attention she gave everything, which was complete and which showed on her face as nothing at all. At 12:40, she ate half a sandwich in the break room. Priya came in for coffee, looked at her, looked away, then looked back. You doing okay? Priya asked. Yes. Priya poured her coffee and stood there a moment longer than she needed to. For the record, she said carefully, everyone in that room knows what you did. It doesn't matter, Mara said. It should. A lot of things should. Mara folded the sandwich wrapper. That's different from whether they do. Priya left with her coffee. Mara sat with the other half of the sandwich and looked at the wall and thought about the call she had seen Rourke making through the window, and what the most likely outcomes were, and in what order they would arrive. She had run variations of this before, in a different context, with different stakes. The logic was the same. When an authority figure feels publicly undermined, the response is proportional not to what actually happened, but to how visible it was. Rourke's reaction in Bay 2 had been witnessed by 2 residents, a charge nurse, a medical student, and at least 3 other nursing staff who had drifted in during the procedure. That was too many people to manage quietly, which meant he wouldn't try to manage it quietly. She finished the sandwich, disposed of the wrapper, and went back to work. The call came at 2:15, not a phone call, a physical appearance. The charge nurse from the administrative floor, a woman named Dolores Fitch, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the expression of someone delivering news she disagreed with but intended to deliver accurately, appeared at the end of Corridor 7 and asked Mara to come with her. HR? Mara asked. Associate Director's Office, Dolores said. Dr. Rourke has filed a formal incident report. Mara parked the cart against the wall, the way she always did, positioned so it wasn't blocking anything. She followed Dolores to the elevator without asking any more questions, because the questions she had weren't ones Dolores could answer. The associate director was a man named Gerald Whitmore, mid-50s, the particular build of someone who had been athletic in his 30s and hadn't quite let go of it, with the specific quality of discomfort that administrators get when they have to manage something that intersects with clinical practice. He was sitting behind a desk with a folder open in front of him. Rourke was in the chair to the right. An HR representative named Sandra Cho sat to the left with a notepad. Mara sat in the chair they indicated across from Whitmore and put her hands on her thighs. Miss Voss, Whitmore said, you understand why you're here. Dr. Rourke filed a report. That's correct. The report alleges that you entered an active trauma bay without authorization, interfered with an attending physician's management of a critical patient, and performed a surgical procedure without clinical credentials. He looked at her steadily. Is that an accurate description of what occurred? She considered several possible framings and chose the simplest one. I performed a cricothyrotomy on a patient whose airway was failing and who had approximately 60 to 90 seconds before the window for intervention closed. The patient is alive. Whitmore's expression didn't change. Rourke's did. That's not the... Rourke started. Let me finish, Clement, Whitmore said, not harshly but with finality. Then back to Mara. Your employment file lists your position as Environmental Services Technician. Your credentialing documents indicate a CNA license from 3 years ago, currently inactive. There is nothing in your file that authorizes clinical intervention of any kind, let alone surgical. That's accurate, Mara said. So you understood that what you were doing was outside your authorized scope? Yes. And you did it anyway? Yes. The room held that for a moment. Sandra Cho was writing something. Rourke shifted in his chair with the energy of someone who wanted to say more and was restraining himself with visible effort. Ms. Voss, Whitmore said, I want to give you the opportunity to provide any context that might be relevant to this situation. Anything about your background or qualifications that isn't reflected in your personnel file. He was giving her an opening, she understood. Whether he intended it that way or whether it was simply procedural fairness, she couldn't be certain. Either way, she knew what walking through that opening would cost, and she had calculated it in the 15 minutes between Dolores's appearance in Corridor 7 and this chair. I don't have anything to add, she said. Whitmore sat back slightly. You understand that without mitigating context, the hospital has a liability exposure here that requires a response. I understand. And you're choosing not to provide any additional information. That's correct. Rourke couldn't hold it anymore. She's not a nurse. She's not a medic. She has no documented credentials, and she cut into a patient in my ER. If that patient develops complications, if there's any infection or structural issue from that procedure, this hospital's looking at... The patient is stable, Mara said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a data point. That's not the point, Rourke said. I know it isn't, she said. And she did know. The point was never the patient's outcome in situations like this. The point was the hierarchy, and what happened to it when someone from the wrong level of it did something the right level couldn't. Whitmore folded his hands on the desk. Ms. Voss, pending review, we're suspending your access to the facility effective immediately. You'll be placed on administrative hold, which is not a termination, while we complete a formal investigation. You'll receive written notice within 72 hours. He paused. Do you have any questions? She thought about it genuinely. The patient in Bay 2? What was his name? Whitmore looked slightly thrown. That's not information we can share. Okay. She stood. Where do I leave my badge? Bong. Dolores walked her to the locker room. Not because it was Dolores's job exactly, but Mara had the impression Dolores did a lot of things that weren't strictly her job because she had been in hospitals long enough to know that institutional processes were better when a human being was attached to them. "Leave the facility badge with security on your way out," Dolores said. "Your personal items, obviously, you keep." "I know how this works," Mara said. "I know you do." Dolores paused at the locker room door. "I've been doing this for 22 years. I've seen a lot of incident reports. I want you to know—" She stopped, seeming to decide something. "That man in Bay 2, his name is Robert. His wife has been in the family waiting room for 3 hours. They told her he's stable." She met Mara's eyes. "I thought you should know." Mara nodded once. "Thank you, Dolores." She went into the locker room and opened her locker. Her things were minimal. She had learned years ago not to accumulate things in places she might have to leave. A jacket, a phone, the device that was not technically hers, dark and silent for 6 weeks, a small bag with a change of clothes. She packed it in under 2 minutes. She was reaching for her jacket when the locker room door opened and Theo Marsh came in, then stopped when he saw her. "Sorry, I didn't know you were—" He looked at the bag, at the jacket. "Are they—" "Administrative hold," she said, "pending investigation." "That's—" He seemed to reach for the professional response, then abandon it. "That's completely insane. You saved that man's life." "I violated scope of practice. They're not wrong about that." "You're defending them?" "I'm describing the situation accurately." She zipped the bag. "Rourke isn't wrong that I did something I wasn't authorized to do. He's wrong about why it was wrong." Theo leaned against the row of lockers, arms crossed, with the expression of someone working through a problem that was resisting solution. "You knew how to do that, the Creech. You didn't hesitate. You moved like you'd done it before." Mara picked up her bag. "Who are you?" Theo asked. Not aggressively. More like someone who genuinely wanted to understand the thing in front of him that wasn't adding up. "Someone who did what needed to be done," she said. "Get back to your rotation." "Mara, you're going to be a doctor," she said, and she wasn't being dismissive. She meant it as a thing with weight. "Don't start your career attaching yourself to someone else's problem. It costs more than you think." She walked past him and through the door. Security was a man named Douglas, who she had spoken to maybe 4 times in 6 weeks, and who had always been decent about it. He took her badge with both hands and didn't make it into anything it didn't need to be. "Anything I can do?" he said. "No, thank you, Douglas." She walked out through the side entrance, the one that staff used, into the afternoon air. The city was doing what mid-afternoon cities do. Traffic building, a school bus making a turn on the corner, someone eating a late lunch on a bench outside the pharmacy across the street. Ordinary, at every frequency. She had parked 3 blocks away because she always parked 3 blocks away. She walked to her car, a 6-year-old gray Civic that she had bought for cash from a private seller in a neighboring county and which had no particular features to recommend it, except that it ran reliably and nobody looked at it. She put her bag in the trunk. She sat in the driver's seat. She did not start the car immediately. From her jacket pocket, she took the device, the one that wasn't hers, technically. It was a ruggedized satellite-linked phone that had been issued to her before the thing she didn't think about directly had happened. She had carried it for 14 months because she had been told to carry it, and because disposing of it would have sent a message she wasn't ready to send. It was still dark, still silent. She put it in the cup holder and started the car. She had a room at an extended-stay motel 4 miles from the hospital, had chosen it the way she chose everything about this cover, which was with attention to what it wouldn't attract. Ground floor, corner unit, parking directly outside her door. She drove there now, following a route that she varied slightly each time, not out of specific threat assessment, but out of habit. The room was exactly as she had left it this morning. Bed made with hospital corners, which was the only kind she could make. A small table with a chair, a laptop that connected through a VPN service she paid for in cash equivalents, a window that faced the parking lot. She set her bag on the bed and stood in the center of the room and thought about what came next. The administrative hold would proceed to investigation, which would proceed to termination, which would proceed to her having to become someone else somewhere else. She had done that before. It was not complicated exactly, but it was exhausting in a specific way that accumulated over time, and she was more tired than she had been the last time. The thing that was different about today was that she had broken cover. Not completely. Her name was still clean. Her documentation was intact. Nothing she had done in that bay would trigger a flag in any system that was looking for her specifically. But she had performed a procedure that anyone with a trained eye would recognize as military. The cricothyrotomy she had done was not a hospital technique. It was too fast, too minimal, too adapted to the assumption that she might have to do it one-handed in the dark. Anyone who knew what that looked like would have seen it today. She didn't think Rourke knew what it looked like. She thought Theo Marsh might be starting to wonder. She sat down at the table and opened the laptop. She had 3 things she needed to do before tomorrow morning: update her documentation, research alternative placement options in cities more than 4 hours from Kellerton, and assess whether the incident report Rourke had filed would move through any channel that led somewhere it shouldn't. She was 2 pages into her research when the device in her jacket pocket vibrated. She went very still. It vibrated again. Single pulse. Priority signal. She had not seen a priority signal on that device in 14 months. She picked it up. 1 line of text on the screen. No sender identification, because the sender didn't use identification. Eyes only. Confirm status. She looked at it for a long time. Outside the window, a car pulled into the parking lot and kept going. The motel's ice machine made its sound at the end of the corridor. Someone in the room next to hers had a television on low. She typed 2 characters back. Clean. The response came in 11 seconds, which told her someone was sitting at a terminal waiting. Stand by for contact. Do not alter position. She put the phone down on the table. Stand by. Do not alter position, which meant whatever had just been set in motion was coming to her, not requesting her to go somewhere, which meant it was either very good or very bad, and probably both. She folded her hands on the table. She was still sitting exactly like that 40 minutes later when a car she didn't recognize pulled into the parking lot and stopped outside her unit. Okay, 2 men got out. She assessed them through the window before they knocked. Civilian clothes, the kind of civilian clothes that people wear when they want to look civilian, which meant they were not. Early 40s, both of them. The one on the left had the particular build of someone who had done something physical for a long time and then stopped doing it, but the muscle memory was still in the way he moved. The one on the right was watching the parking lot even as he walked to her door, a scan that went corner to corner, automatic, not something he thought about. She opened the door before they knocked. The one on the left looked at her for a moment. Voss? I don't know you, she said. No. Briggs. He said it like a fact being confirmed, not a name being given. My partner is Lau. We're out of Langley, liaison to... I know what you're a liaison to, she said. Come in. They came in. She closed the door. The room felt smaller with 3 people in it. Lau continued looking out the window. Briggs stood in the center of the room with his hands at his sides and the careful, watchful stillness of someone who had been in a lot of rooms and understood that how you stood in them mattered. 14 months, she said. Nothing. Then today. Today was noticed, Briggs said. By who? Multiple channels. The incident report is in the hospital system. Hospital system interfaces with state medical licensing. State licensing flags unauthorized procedures and routes them through the same clearinghouse that catches credential fraud. He paused. Your name came up. My name is Clean. It is. But the procedure flagged a pattern match. Technique, speed, specific adaptation. There's an analyst at the clearinghouse who spent 3 years embedded with JSOC training units. She recognized it. Mara sat down on the edge of the bed. And that analyst reports to... Not to people who want to cause you problems, Briggs said. That's why we're here instead of someone else. Lau turned from the window. There's a secondary issue, he said. His voice was quieter than Briggs's, more considered. The man you had the confrontation with, Rourke. He filed a report. He did more than file a report. He made 2 phone calls this afternoon. One to a personal attorney, one to a journalist he knows at the Kellerton Tribune. He's pitching it as an unlicensed individual performing emergency surgery in his ER. He wants it public. She thought about that. About Robert in Bay 2, whose wife had been in the family waiting room for 3 hours. About his SATs climbing from 71 to 91 on a monitor she could still see clearly. That complicates things, she said. It does, Briggs agreed. If the story runs, your name goes regional. Regional has a way of going national when the angle is right, and mystery cleaning woman performs surgery is a very good angle. He looked at her steadily, which means your cover isn't just inconvenient anymore. How long before the journalist has enough to publish? Lau and Briggs exchanged something that wasn't quite a look, more like a calibration. 36 hours maybe, Lau said. He'll want to verify the incident report and pull the patient outcome. Then he publishes. 36 hours. She worked through what that meant structurally, where her documentation led, what a journalist would find pulling publicly available records, what the second layer of her cover looked like under actual scrutiny. The second layer was solid, but it wasn't built for a spotlight. It was built to withstand a routine background check, not a journalist who had been handed a story and had motivation to chase it. What are my options? She said. That depends, Briggs said, on whether you want to stay dark or whether you want this handled. He said the last word with the precise weight that certain words carry when they mean more than their surface definition. Define handled. Rourke's calls are already on record. We can ensure the journalist's source dries up. We can have the hospital's incident report flagged under a regulatory review that buries it for 6 months. You relocate, new position, cleaner documentation. He paused. That's option 1. And option 2, Lau took over. Option 2 is that we bring you back in. Not full operational status. That's a separate conversation. But there are people who've been asking about you for a while. People who know what you're capable of and who have a specific situation that, I'm not ready, she said. Okay, Lau said simply. Then we do option 1. Except, Briggs said, there's a piece of option 1 that has a timing problem. He sat down in the chair across from her, which was the first time he had sat, and she understood that this was the part of the conversation that the rest of it had been building toward. The analyst who pattern matched your procedure. She's good, and she's thorough. She's already pulled your original service record, not the surface file, the real one. She doesn't have all of it, but she has enough to cross-reference. And the mission that ended your operational status, the one that was classified above her clearance level, she's filing a query upward. Tonight, probably. He met her eyes. If that query goes to the wrong desk before we can redirect it, the people who originally wanted you dark, not us, not the people we work for, they get notified that you're active and locatable. The room was very quiet. She had spent 14 months in gray extended stay motels not thinking directly about those people. She had thought about them sideways, the way you think about something that you can't look at straight without changing your behavior, and she had built her cover specifically around not being locatable. But locatable was a function of invisibility, and she had walked into that trauma bay this afternoon and been visible to 37 square feet out of security cameras. 2 residents, a charge nurse, a medical student, and a man who was filing incident reports and making calls to journalists. She had known when she pushed through that door what it would cost. She was beginning to understand that she had underestimated the price. How long do we have, she said, before the query goes up? Briggs looked at his watch, then at her. Probably, he said, until morning. She spent the next 2 hours doing nothing that looked like action. She ate from the vending machine at the end of the corridor. Crackers, an apple, a bottle of water. Because going to a restaurant meant being in a space with cameras and witnesses during a window where she needed to be neither. She updated 3 items in her documentation that wouldn't withstand scrutiny at the wrong level. She sent a single encrypted message through a channel that Briggs and Lau didn't know she still had access to a person she hadn't contacted in 14 months, which read, "Query en route. Stall if able." And she sat at the table and thought very carefully about the architecture of the next 12 hours. Briggs and Lau had left with a contact number and a promise that option 1 was in motion. She believed them to the extent that they were doing exactly what they had said and no more, which was as far as she ever believed anyone in that category of person. At 9:47, her personal phone, her actual personal phone, not the device, vibrated with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. Then she looked at the area code and opened it. It said, "This is Theo Marsh. I don't know how you'd feel about hearing from me. I got your number from the staff directory before they pulled your access. I wanted you to know that the man from Bay 2, Robert, woke up this afternoon. His wife was there. He's asking who saved him, and nobody upstairs will say. She read it twice. I just thought you should know, Theo had added, because somebody should tell you. She put the phone face down on the table. Outside, the parking lot was quiet. One car she didn't recognize had been in the same spot since Briggs and Lau left, which was probably nothing, and which she had noted anyway. The motel's ice machine cycled again. A long-haul truck moved through the intersection at the end of the block. She turned the phone back over and looked at Theo's message again. Robert was awake. His wife was there. He was asking who saved him. She had done this work for 11 years, and she still had not found a way to be indifferent to that specific piece of information. She had tried, at various points, because indifference made certain things structurally easier. It had never worked. She was still looking at the phone when the device on the table vibrated again. Not a text this time. 3 pulses, rapid sequence. That was not a standing by signal. That was an escalation. She picked it up. 1 line of text, same as before. Query intercepted. Complication. Contact imminent. Not Briggs. She was on her feet before she finished reading. She crossed to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The car that had been sitting since Briggs and Lau left was still there, but now there was a second one. Dark, no plates visible from this angle, parked at the far edge of the lot, in a position that covered the side exit. Her jacket was on the chair. The device went into her jacket pocket. Her bag was already packed because she had never fully unpacked it. She pulled on the jacket and picked up the bag and stood in the center of the room and made a very fast decision about whether she was the kind of person who ran. She was. She always had been, when running was correct. But she was also the kind of person who, 11 years ago, had decided that some things were worth staying for. She had walked into a trauma bay today because a man named Robert had a minute to live, and she was the only person in the building who could change that. She hadn't run from that. She had made a choice that she knew would cost her, and she had made it anyway, and she stood by it. The question now was not whether she was willing to run. The question was whether running was still an option, or whether the parking lot outside had already foreclosed it. She moved to the window and looked out again, and the dark car at the far edge of the lot had turned its lights on. Not running was a decision that took about 4 seconds to make, and would probably take years to fully understand. She stepped back from the window, away from the line of sight, and stood against the wall beside the doorframe. The lights in the room were still on. Changing that now would signal to whoever was outside that she had noticed them, and she needed another 30 seconds before she wanted them to know that. She used the 30 seconds to look at her bag, look at the room, and confirm that she had not left anything she couldn't replace. She had not. The device vibrated again. Same rapid triple pulse, then a 4th she hadn't seen before. She looked at it. Back channel active, hold position. 3 minutes. 3 minutes was a long time in a small room with 2 vehicles in the parking lot that she didn't like the look of. It was also a very short time if whatever was coming through the back channel was going to change the shape of the next 12 hours. She held position. She counted. Not in her head. Actually counted. Subvocal, because audible rhythm keeps the body from doing things the mind hasn't authorized. At 90 seconds, the car with the lights on hadn't moved. At 2 minutes, the other car's occupant, she could see the outline from her angle, shifted, the way people shift when they've been sitting somewhere longer than they expected to. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, her personal phone vibrated. Unknown number, different area code from Theo's. She answered it. Voss. A woman's voice, controlled and quick, the way people talk when they're operating under time pressure and have filtered out everything that isn't information. This is Heller. You don't know me. I'm the analyst Briggs told you about. Mara didn't say anything for a second. You're the one who pattern matched the procedure. Yes. And I'm also the one who filed the query upward, which I did before Briggs got to me, and I'm sorry for the chain of events that caused. I'm calling you directly because the query went to a desk I didn't intend it to go to, and I have been correcting that for the last 90 minutes, and I need you to know that the 2 vehicles outside your unit are not from that desk. Then who are they from? One of them is mine. The driver's name is Santos. He's there to provide transport if you need to move quickly. The other vehicle. A brief pause, the kind that means information is being checked. The other vehicle we don't have a full read on yet. Don't engage. Don't exit toward it. Which side is Santos on? North side of the lot. Navy blue sedan. He'll flash his lights twice when I tell him to. Mara moved back to the window at an angle that kept her out of direct sightline. She found the navy blue sedan. It was parked where she would have parked if she had been Santos. Good sightline to the room door, good exit path, engine probably running under the sound of the motel's HVAC. "How did my query go to the wrong desk?" she said. "Human error," Heller said. "Mine. I routed it through a joint agency clearinghouse instead of direct because I was trying to keep it off the main log. The clearinghouse had a liaison from a group that maintains an interest in your file. I didn't know that before I filed. And now they know I'm active. They know you're in Kellerton. They don't have an exact address yet, but the incident report has the hospital name, and Kellerton isn't large." Mara looked at the other car. The outline in the driver's seat hadn't moved, which was professional, which didn't tell her much. "How long before the other vehicle gets confirmation on this unit?" "I genuinely don't know. That's the honest answer." She respected the honest answer. "Tell Santos to flash." 2 flashes from the navy blue sedan. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to move to him. I need 30 seconds to clear my room." "You have it." She ended the call. 30 seconds was not a lot of time to think, but it was enough to act, and acting was what the situation required. She confirmed the bag was zipped. She moved to the door and looked at the gap between the room and Santos's sedan and mapped the path. 19, 20 feet, exposed, crossing in front of a parking lot that had 2 vehicles of uncertain intent. The direct route was the fastest. The fastest was probably the right call. She opened the door and walked to the sedan without hurrying, because hurrying looks different from the outside than moving with purpose, and moving with purpose was the correct register. She got to the passenger side, opened the door, and got in. Santos was exactly what she expected. Late 30s, compact, the kind of stillness that isn't calm so much as habitual containment. He had the sedan in reverse before she had the door fully shut. "Heller said northern routing," he said. "Not yet." She was watching the other car in the side mirror. "Hold." He held. The other car hadn't moved. "They might not have confirmation on me specifically," she said. "They might be working from the hospital and running a grid." "That's what I do," Santos said. "If they're grid running, moving now tells them which unit was active." She watched the mirror for another 6 seconds. "Back out slowly. Don't use your headlights until we're on the street." He backed out slowly. The other car didn't follow. She kept watching until they were off the lot and onto the access road, and then she turned forward and made herself stop looking at the mirror, because there was a point past which surveillance became counterproductive, and she was approaching it. "Where are we going?" she said. "Heller has a location, 12 minutes from here." "What kind of location?" "Secure staging. She'll brief you there." She looked at her hands. They were steady, which was mostly training and partly adrenaline converting into focus, and partly, she was honest with herself about this, the fact that she was in motion now, which was better than the motel room had started to feel. The motel room had started to feel like waiting for something she couldn't prevent, and she had discovered years ago that action, even uncertain action, was structurally better for her than waiting. She thought about Rourke's calls, the journalist with 36 hours and a good angle. Robert in Bay 2, awake now, asking who saved him. Theo Marsh with her phone number and a text that said somebody should tell you. She thought about what it meant that she had broken cover not because she had been found, not because of a mission or a recall, but because of a man named Robert who had 60 seconds left and a room full of people who couldn't help him. She was not sure what that meant about her. She had more immediate problems than figuring it out. The secure staging location was a commercial unit in a light industrial stretch of Kellerton's eastern edge, the kind of building that was unremarkable from every direction, leased under a name that didn't point anywhere, with a parking area screened from the road by a maintenance yard. Santos pulled in through a side gate. She counted 2 other vehicles, both dark, both backed in. Professional habit. Inside was a converted space, concrete floor, folding tables with laptops, industrial lighting on adjustable brackets. 3 people who looked up when she came in and then went back to their screens. Heller was at the far table. She looked roughly 35. Red hair, practical and pulled back. The kind of face that had probably been younger looking before the job wore it to its current configuration. She stood when Mara came in. "I'm glad you're here," she said, and it sounded like she meant it. which didn't mean Mara trusted it, but she noted it. I want to understand the query situation before anything else, Mara said. Walk me through it. Heller walked her through it. It took 8 minutes and was detailed and consistent and didn't contradict what Mara already knew, which was a reasonable standard. The short version was, the query had flagged at a joint agency desk where a liaison from a group called OVR, Office of Variance Recovery, which was bureaucratic language for the people who cleaned up after operations that went wrong in documented ways, maintained an access protocol. OVR had an interest in Mara's file because the mission that had ended her operational status had generated an OVR review, and OVR reviews didn't close until all relevant parties were accounted for. Mara was a relevant party. They're not looking to hurt you, Heller said carefully. Officially, what they want is a debrief they didn't get 14 months ago. And unofficially, Heller chose her next words with visible care. The people who ran the mission that ended your status, 2 of them are still active. One is in a position that would be significantly affected by a full debrief from you. The debrief you would give, given what you actually saw during the mission collapse, would not be comfortable for that person. So, unofficially, the debrief doesn't happen, Mara said. And the way it doesn't happen is that I stay disappeared. That has been the equilibrium for 14 months, yes. Until today. Until today. She sat down in one of the folding chairs. The chair was slightly uneven, one leg shorter than the others, and it rocked when she shifted her weight. She found this almost funny in a way she didn't examine closely. What does OVR know about my location right now? She said. That you're in Kellerton. The grid check that vehicle was running was probably still in early phase when Santos extracted you. But Kellerton is not that large. Heller paused. And the journalist is a problem. I know. If the story runs tomorrow with your name. I know, she said again. How do we stop the story? We could approach the journalist directly. Flag it as a national security concern. That process usually takes how long? 48 to 72 hours to go through proper channels. 24 if we have someone with the right authority to make a direct call. Heller looked at her across the table. Which brings me to what I actually need to talk to you about. The reason I called you personally instead of just sending Santos. Mara waited. There are people who have been trying to bring you back in for 8 months. I'm part of that effort. Not Briggs. He's a different branch, and his option 1 is real and available, but it's a holding pattern, not a solution. The people I work with want the OVR situation resolved, which means the debrief needs to happen in a controlled setting with the right people in the room. If you come back in on our terms, with our documentation, the debrief happens under conditions that protect you and generate the record that puts OVR's interest in you to rest permanently. And the 2 active people who ran the mission face a process that is legal, documented, and very hard to bury. Heller held her gaze. I want to be clear. I'm not offering you safety in exchange for testimony that damages someone. I'm saying that the truth of what happened on that mission, documented properly, solves your problem and also happens to solve a larger problem that other people care about for their own reasons. That's a careful way to say it. It's an accurate way to say it. Mara looked at the table, at her hands on it, at the faint scar on the back of her left hand that was from a different situation in a different country and had nothing to do with today. I need to know something, she said. The journalist, Rourke's source. Even if we handle OVR, even if the debrief happens and the record is clean, the story still runs unless we stop it tonight. Correct. And if the story runs, my name is regional by morning. Correct. So the debrief and the journalist are parallel problems that both need resolution in the next 16 hours. That's the situation, yes. She breathed out through her nose. You have someone who can make the call to the journalist. Stop the story under national security grounds. I have someone who can initiate that process. What do they need from me? Heller looked at her. They need to know you're coming in. That's it. That's the authorization. If you confirm you're coming back in voluntarily, they make the call. Mara understood exactly what was being asked. Coming back in voluntarily was not the same as being retrieved. It changed the paperwork. It changed the legal standing. It changed what she was allowed to know when she walked into the debrief room. It also changed what she was allowed to refuse. If I come in voluntarily, she said, and the debrief goes wrong. Then you're in a worse position than you are now, Heller said. I won't lie to you about that. The protection is in the documentation and the people in the room, not in the fact of your voluntary status. If the documentation gets buried and the room is wrong, voluntary doesn't protect you. So I'd be trusting you. Yes. And the people you work with. Yes. I don't know you, Mara said. No. Heller nodded. You don't. The room was quiet except for the sound of the laptops, and outside, a truck moving through the industrial area at the pace of somewhere else to be. Tell me about the people in the room, Mara said. All of them. Names, positions, which branch, how long they've been on this. And Heller told her. It took 40 minutes. Mara listened to all of it, interrupted twice for clarification, and then sat with it for 5 more minutes while Heller let her. At the end of the 5 minutes, she said, Make the call to the journalist and tell whoever needs to know that I'm coming in. Yes. What she didn't expect was how quickly it moved after that. The call to the journalist went out at 11:47 p.m. She didn't hear the call, but she heard the result. Heller came back into the room 20 minutes later and said, Story's on hold, national security review of sources. He'll comply. She said it plainly, the way you report facts, and Mara noted that she didn't editorialize about the journalist's rights or the ethics of suppressing a story, which she respected because this was not a situation that had clean ethics anywhere in it, and pretending otherwise would have made Mara trust her less. The first concrete step of coming back in was paperwork, which was not cinematic, but was very real. Santos produced a laptop, and she spent an hour going through documentation, reactivation forms, status certification, a chain of custody for the mission records that she would bring to the debrief. Some of what she signed, she read carefully. Some of it she understood only in outline. She had a lawyer, technically, somewhere in the architecture of her original contract, but calling that lawyer at midnight while sitting in a light industrial staging area with 3 federal employees was not practically achievable, and she was making decisions on the basis of her own assessment of Heller, which she updated continuously and which remained cautious but not alarmed. At 1:15 a.m., her personal phone buzzed again. She looked at it expecting Theo. It wasn't Theo. It was a Kellerton Tribune email notification. She had set up a news alert for her own name months ago when she first took the hospital position, as an early warning system. She opened it. The alert had triggered not on her name but on the hospital's. The headline, published 2 minutes ago as a web update, read, Hargrove Regional ER staff saves 12 in highway pileup. Doctor hailed as hero. She read the first paragraph. Robert's name wasn't in it. The specific circumstances of Bay 2 weren't in it. Rourke's name was twice in the first 2 sentences. She put the phone face down. Santos, across the table, was watching her with the peripheral attention of someone who knows it's not their business but wants to be useful if it becomes relevant. Everything okay? Fine, she said, and meant it in the specific sense that it was fine, and the other sense that fine was a complicated word. At 2 a.m., Heller came to her with an update that changed the geometry of the next 12 hours. OVR made contact, she said. She sat down, which was a change in posture from the previous hours, and which Mara read as a signal that this part required attention. Not to us directly. They filed an emergency locator request through the hospital system using the incident report as probable cause. What that means operationally is that they have a legitimate procedural basis to request your location from any federal interface, including the clearinghouse. How long before that request resolves? 6 hours? Maybe 5. And the debrief? How long to set up properly? The people who need to be in the room are in 4 different locations. Earliest I can have them assembled is... She glanced at something on her tablet. 9 a.m. The location is in D.C. We'd need to move you tonight. Mara worked through it. OVR's request resolving at 7 or 8 a.m. The debrief at 9. The gap between those 2 numbers was very thin and depended on the locator request moving at its standard pace and not being expedited by whoever at OVR was motivated to find her. The person at OVR, she said, the one with the specific motivation. Do you have a read on how hard they'll push? Heller looked at her steadily. I think they'll push hard. Then we don't have until 9. Mara said. No. The debrief moves earlier. The earliest I can have 3 of the 4 people assembled is 6 a.m. The 4th is... She stopped. The 4th is actually already in D.C. He got there yesterday for a different meeting. Then 6 a.m. with 3 is better than 9 a.m. with 4 if the 4th person's absence doesn't compromise the record. Heller thought about it for 10 seconds, which was a real 10 seconds of actual consideration, not performance. It doesn't. 3 is sufficient to create an official record. The 4th can sign off remotely. Then we move tonight. Okay. Heller stood. Santos can have transport ready in 40 minutes. It ticked. The drive to the airfield took 22 minutes. She didn't sleep during it. She sat in the back of the vehicle, a different one from Santos's sedan, an SUV with tinted windows, another driver whose name she wasn't given, and went through the mission in her head the way she had not allowed herself to go through it in 14 months. She had avoided it deliberately. Not because it was traumatic, exactly. She had a pragmatic relationship with trauma, which was that it was real and it affected behavior and you managed it. But because thinking about the mission meant thinking about what she had seen, and what she had seen was information, and information was leverage, and leverage in the wrong hands was a problem. She had kept the information in a box that she only opened on the terms she controlled. The terms were changing. She went through it systematically, the way she had been trained to conduct after-action analysis. Start with the objective, move through the timeline, identify decision points, identify outcomes. Don't editorialize. Don't assign blame before you've assembled the sequence. The objective had been medical extraction, a high-value individual in a location that required both clinical capacity and operational capability to reach. That was why they had sent her. Not a standard medic, not a standard operative, but someone who could do both. She had done both for 3 years. The individual had been alive when she got there. That was important. The record would show otherwise. The record had been altered, she was nearly certain, by the 2 people Heller had described, and she had been carrying the correct version in her head for 14 months, and she was about to put it somewhere it could not be altered again. She felt, thinking about this, something she recognized after a moment as relief. She had expected something harder, dread, or the particular weight of facing something she'd been carrying too long. What she felt instead was the specific relief of putting a bag down that you've been carrying for so long you forgot you were carrying it. It would not be easy. The debrief would be difficult, and the people in the room would ask questions she'd spent 14 months not answering, and the record she created would have consequences for people who had resources and motivation to fight those consequences. It would take a long time, and there would be nothing smooth about any of it. But she was done hiding in motels. That was the clearest thing she had felt since the afternoon in Bay 2. The airfield was small. 4 hangars, a single strip, the kind of facility that existed off official records, not because it was secret, but because it was too small to matter to anyone who wasn't using it. The plane was a twin-engine turboprop, 12 seats, already running. She climbed the steps and found Heller already aboard, laptop open. "You need to sleep," Heller said, looking at her. "I know." "The debrief starts at 6, and they'll push hard for 2 to 3 hours minimum. You need..." "I know," she said again. She sat down. The plane was loud in the way small planes are loud, which she had always found easier to sleep in than the pressurized quiet of commercial flights. She closed her eyes. She did not expect to sleep. She slept. Odd. She woke when the wheels came down and the turboprop's pitch changed, and for a disoriented second she was somewhere else. Different aircraft, different mission, different name. And then the second resolved, and she was herself, in a seat, approaching a runway in the gray-blue pre-dawn that happens at 5:30 a.m. in the middle of the country. Heller was awake across the aisle, the laptop still open. She looked up when Mara woke. "We're 30 minutes out. I have an update." The update came in 3 pieces. The first was that OVR's locator request had been expedited. Someone had pushed it, which confirmed Heller's read on motivation. The expedited version had come back with her motel address 2 hours ago, which was already empty, which gave them a window. The second piece was that Rourke, at some point between midnight and 5 a.m., had filed a supplementary incident report adding the allegation that Mara had presented false credentials when she applied for her environmental services position. This was not true, but it was the kind of allegation that created procedural momentum. and it would reach the hospital administration's legal team by morning. The third piece was the one that made her sit forward. Theo Marsh, Heller said, the medical student. What about him? He filed a statement this morning. Voluntary, unsolicited, sent directly to hospital administration and CC'd to the state medical licensing board. Heller turned the laptop so Mara could see it. He described what he witnessed in Bay 2 in clinical detail. He named the procedure correctly, described the execution, and gave his assessment of the outcome. He also stated that, in his observation, the intervention was the direct cause of the patient's survival. She read it. It was detailed and careful and used precise language, not the language of a student trying to sound impressive, but the language of someone who had looked at what he saw and decided to describe it accurately regardless of who it helped or hurt. She looked up. He could face blowback for this. Possibly, Heller said. Rourke still has standing at that hospital. He's a third-year student. I know. She thought about Theo in the locker room doorway, asking who she was and the way she had told him to get back to his rotation and not attach himself to her problem. He didn't listen, she said. Apparently not. The plane descended through the thin cloud layer and the city came into view below them, the way cities look from altitude in early morning, lit from within, still, organizing itself for a day that hadn't started yet. One more thing, Heller said. She said it with a specific quality that made Mara look at her before she said it. The people coming to the debrief. I told you 3 of the 4. I didn't tell you the 4th, the one who's already in D.C. You said he could sign off remotely. He could. He's choosing not to. Heller closed the laptop. His name is Vice Admiral Thomas Garrett. He was your commanding officer during your first operational deployment. He's been the one pushing for your return for 8 months. Mara sat with that. Thomas Garrett. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. He had retired from active service between her deployment and the mission. She had heard that secondhand through the fragmented information network she maintained in isolation. She had assumed his retirement meant he was gone from the architecture, the way senior people go gone when they stop being senior. She had been wrong about that. He's the one who found you, Heller said quietly. Kellerton, the hospital. He knew where you were for 4 months before the incident report. He didn't move on it because moving on it meant disrupting the cover you'd built. And he said, she paused. He said you'd earned the right to come out on your own terms. The plane touched down with the specific jolt of a runway that's adequate but not smooth. And Mara braced and let the deceleration happen and looked out the small oval window at the gray tarmac moving past. Garrett. 4 months. Waiting because she'd earned it. She did not know what to do with that, emotionally, and she didn't try to process it in the 90 seconds it took the plane to reach the hangar. She filed it in the same place she filed everything she couldn't address immediately. Accessible, but not active, available when the situation allowed. The situation was going to allow it. She understood that now. Not today, and not cleanly, but eventually. She unfolded from the seat and picked up her bag. The hangar was lit, and there were people waiting. 2 of them, with the specific quality of people who are standing in a specific place because they have been sent to stand in it. She walked toward them. Her phone buzzed one more time. Theo again. She looked at it without slowing down. Rourke is saying you gave false credentials to get your job. I don't know if that's true, but I also don't think it matters. I filed a statement. He can do what he wants with it. Then a second message, apparently sent immediately after. The patient from Bay 2, Robert, is asking for a name. His wife said he keeps asking. I told her I didn't know your full name, which is technically true. But if you ever want me to tell him something, I will. She stopped walking for exactly 1 second. Then she kept going because the 2 people in the hangar were waiting and the debrief was in 47 minutes and she had 14 months of information to put on record in a room that would finally be ready to hold it. But she typed 4 words before she put the phone in her pocket. Tell him, Mara, Voss. She put the phone away. The larger of the 2 people waiting extended his hand. Ms. Voss, I'm Delgado. We'll take you to the facility. He looked at her with the professional assessment of someone who has been briefed on a person and is now reconciling the briefing with the reality. Admiral Garrett is already there. How long has he been waiting? She said. Delgado almost smiled. Since 4 a.m. She nodded once and followed them out of the hangar, and outside the gray dawn was getting lighter in the east the way it always did, without drama, without announcement, just the slow return of the kind of light you could actually see by. The vehicle waiting was a dark SUV, government plates. Delgado opened the door and she got in, and the second person, a woman, early 30s, the kind of stillness that is actual stillness and not performance, sat in the front without speaking. They pulled out of the airfield and onto a road that was still mostly empty at 5:43 in the morning. And then Delgado's radio crackled. He answered it, listened for 8 seconds, and turned to look at her from the front seat. The expression on his face was the expression of a person who has received information that doesn't fit what they expected to receive. "What is it?" she said. "OVR," he said. "They're not just running a locator request anymore." He handed the radio to her. She listened to the voice on the other end, terse, clipped, the voice of someone delivering information under duress, and understood within 10 seconds that what she had thought was a controlled entry into a prepared situation had just developed a variable that nobody in this vehicle had accounted for. She handed the radio back. "How far to the facility?" she said. 19 minutes. She looked at the road ahead. 19 minutes, the debrief starting in 40. And somewhere behind them, not figuratively, she was nearly certain, but actually behind them, because OVR had made a field-level move that should not have been possible inside a timeline this compressed, which meant someone had resources and authorization at a level that was going to make the next 40 minutes very much not what anyone had planned. "Drive faster," she said. The driver pushed it to 70 on a road that was rated for 55, which was the right call, and also the kind of call that meant everyone in the vehicle understood they were past the phase where caution was the primary variable. Mara kept the radio in her hand. The voice on the other end had gone quiet after the initial report, and she didn't ask for more because she had enough to work with. OVR had moved from administrative process to field-level action, which meant someone had authorized resources that couldn't be authorized through standard channels without a senior signature. That signature either belonged to the person Heller had described, the one with direct motivation to prevent her debrief, or to someone above that person, which was worse. "Heller," she said. Heller was on her phone in the back seat, already working it. "I heard. Who at OVR has field authorization at this hour?" "Theoretically, the deputy director. Practically," she paused, listening to whatever was on her phone. "Practically, the deputy director doesn't move field assets before 6 a.m. without a direct request from someone with more standing." "Marsh," the woman in the front seat said. Her first word since the airfield. "Colonel Marsh, OVR. Not the student, different person. He's been OVR's operational lead on variance recovery for 11 months. Mara looked at her. "You know who authorized it." "I know who probably authorized it. I didn't want to say it until I was sure." The woman, she still hadn't given a name, and Mara had stopped expecting one, was looking at her phone. "I'm sure now." And Colonel Marcus Marsh authorized a field intercept at 5:41 a.m. using an emergency variance recovery protocol. That protocol gives him the authority to detain persons of interest in active national security reviews without prior judicial review for up to 6 hours. She looked up from the phone and met Mara's eyes in the rear view. "That's the protocol. Legally, he can do this." "Where does the intercept land?" "Unknown yet. But if they know we're coming from the airfield, they know the likely routing." Mara looked out the window. They were on a 4-lane divided road now, the kind of road that was mostly warehouses and light commercial on both sides at this hour, nothing to obstruct sight lines in either direction. "Good for them, and also good for anyone watching the approach." "There's a secondary route," the driver said. He said it to the windshield rather than to anyone specific. "Adds 9 minutes, but it's less predictable." "Take it," Mara said. He took it. The vehicle swung onto a service road and then through an underpass, and she felt the shift in her body that came with changing the plan mid-motion. Not panic, just the recalibration of expectations. 9 more minutes. 19 plus 9 was 28 total, which put them at the facility at 6:11 against a debrief scheduled for 6, which was late but not untenable if Garrett was already there and the room was set. The facility was not a dramatic building. She had been in enough of these to have an expectation, and this one met it. A 6-story office structure in a block of similar structures, the kind of address that didn't appear in any directory under anything that would attract attention. Underground parking, access-controlled lobby, the kind of carpeting that said federal contractor rather than federal agency, which was the point. They pulled into the underground parking at 6:14. She got out before the vehicle fully stopped, which was impatience and also efficiency, and Delgado had to move quickly to keep up as she went toward the elevator bank. Heller fell in beside her. "Third floor," Heller said. "Conference Suite B. I need to warn you." "Garrett," Mara said. "He looks older than you're probably expecting." She hadn't been expecting anything specific. "Okay. And he'll want to say something before we start. I'd let him."
"I'll evaluate that when I hear what it is." The elevator opened on 3. She stepped out into a corridor that smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner, and coffee that had been running since before 5, and followed Delgado left and through a set of glass-paneled doors into a suite that had the specific feel of a room that had been prepared for a particular purpose and was waiting for that purpose to arrive. 3 people stood when she came in.
She registered them in sequence. A woman in her 50s with the bearing of someone who had done policy work at a senior level for a long time and had the particular tiredness of someone who had been up since at least 3. A man she didn't recognize, early 60s, civilian clothes but military posture, some kind of senior analyst given the lack of any insignia or identifier. And then the third, Thomas Garrett, was 71. She knew his age from service records, but she had last seen him at 66, and the 5 years had done what 5 years do when they are the 5 years between the mid-60s and the early 70s, and the person has also been operating at a level of sustained pressure that does not ease with retirement. He was thinner than she remembered. The hair was fully white now rather than silver, but his eyes had not changed. The specific quality of attention that she had recognized 20 years ago when he was her commanding officer and had relied on every time since, which was that he looked at you like you were the only variable in the room that actually mattered. "Mara," he said. "Admiral." She used the title because he had been the admiral for so long that his name and his rank had fused into a single entity in her mind, and she couldn't separate them quickly. He came around the table and she thought for a disoriented second that he was going to hug her, which would have been something she didn't know how to handle, but he stopped a foot away and put out his hand instead, which she shook. His hand was cold from the room temperature, not from nerves. He wasn't nervous. He was something else. She read it as something adjacent to relieved, with an underlying quality of tension that hadn't resolved yet. "Sit down," he said. "All of you. We have a field problem, and we can talk while we deal with it." The next 20 minutes ran on 2 tracks simultaneously, which was uncomfortable but necessary. On one track, Heller and the unnamed woman were coordinating a response to OVR's field intercept order, working phones, pulling contacts, trying to determine exactly where the intercept team had deployed and whether there was a legal basis to challenge the emergency protocol authorization before it could be executed. On the second track, Garrett and the analyst and the policy woman were setting up the debrief framework, establishing the record, and doing the procedural work that turned a conversation into a documented event that could survive scrutiny. Mara was on both tracks at once. "Walk me through the mission timeline, Todd," the policy woman said. Her name was Patricia Vane, and she had been introduced as DOD Inspector General's office, which was the credential that mattered most in this room. "Start from the point of insertion." "Before I do," Mara said, "I want to understand what documentation you already have." "We have the official after-action report," Vane said, filed by the mission commander, Colonel David Serrano, 72 hours after extraction. The name landed in the room with the particular weight of a name that everyone present had been carefully not saying until this moment. "And the discrepancies," Mara said. "The official report states the high-value individual, Dr. Ansel Rowe, identified as a senior biomedical intelligence asset, was deceased at the point of contact. That extraction was not viable, and you were extracted under enemy contact after the mission was aborted." Vane held her gaze steadily. "That is the official record." "That's not what happened," Mara said. "We know that," Garrett said from the end of the table. "That's why you're here." She told them what happened. She had not said it aloud in 14 months, and the act of saying it was strange in a physical way, like using a muscle that had been kept still and finding it stiff but functional. She went through it without editorializing, the way she had rehearsed it on the plane, timeline first, decision points identified. Dr. Rowe had been alive, he had been injured, Severely, blunt force trauma to the right side. She had assessed 2 broken ribs and internal bleeding that was manageable with proper intervention, but alive, conscious, and in possession of his faculties. He had spoken to her. He had given her 3 pieces of information that she had memorized and not committed to any accessible storage. And those 3 pieces of information were the reason Serrano had filed the report he had filed. He knew what Rowe told you, Garrett said. It wasn't a question. Serrano was monitoring comms through the extraction phase. He heard the conversation. She paused. Rowe died during extraction. That part of the official report is accurate. He died of internal hemorrhage 40 minutes into the transport because we didn't have the equipment to manage it in the field, and I had been specifically denied a full kit before insertion. That decision was Serrano's, Vane said. Yes, and the denial of the kit made Rowe's survival in the event of injury significantly less likely. Anyone who understands field medicine would look at that decision and reach that conclusion, yes. The room was quiet for a moment. The analyst, who had been writing steadily, stopped writing and looked up. What did Rowe tell you? He said. She told them. All 3 pieces. She watched Garrett's face while she said it, because his face was the one she had the best baseline for, and what she saw there was not surprise. He had known, or suspected, at least part of it. That's consistent with what the IG's office has been building independently, Vane said when she finished. It corroborates the documentary record we've assembled from 3 separate sources. Yours is the 4th, and it's the most direct. Serrano, Mara said, and the other person, a civilian contractor named Elaine Furrer, Vane said. She's OVR's intelligence liaison. She was embedded with the mission planning team. She had access to Rowe's file, and she knew what his information would do to a specific set of arrangements that she and Serrano had a shared interest in protecting. Furrer is the one who pushed the emergency protocol, the unnamed woman said from the side of the room, phone still in hand. I just confirmed it. Colonel Marsh at OVR signed it, but the request originated from Furrer. She's trying to interrupt this debrief, Mara said. She's trying to interrupt it before it creates a record, Vane said. Once we have a documented witness statement with IG standing, the record exists regardless of what happens afterward. The statement is time-stamped. The corroboration is on file. The chain of documentation is intact. Then let's make sure the statement is on record before the intercept team finds this building, Mara said. That, Garrett said, is why we started the moment you walked in. They got the formal statement on record at 6:47 a.m. It took 31 minutes, which was faster than it should have been, but not faster than the facts warranted. The analyst typed and Vane guided and Mara answered, and at the end of it, when the document was certified and time-stamped and sent simultaneously to 3 separate secure repositories that were independently maintained, she felt the thing she had expected to feel on the plane. The closing of something that had been open and wrong for 14 months. It was not relief, exactly. It was more like the specific feeling of having put something down correctly. Not gently, correctly. At 6:52, Heller came back into the room from the side office where she had been working the phone. Her expression was neutral in the way that neutral is controlled, not natural. OVR's intercept team, she said. They're in the building. Garrett looked at her. Building security? They have the emergency protocol authorization. Security is legally required to allow access. She paused. They're in the lobby. We have maybe 5 minutes. Vane was already on her phone. I'm calling the IG's direct line. The record is in the system. The legal basis for the intercept protocol dissolves the moment the IG certifies the debrief record because it removes the national security variance that gives OVR grounds for detention. How long does certification take? Mara said. 3 to 4 minutes under the emergency certification protocol. Then start it now, Mara said. Vane started it. Garrett stood and went to the door and spoke briefly to Delgado in the corridor. And Mara didn't hear all of it, but she heard enough to know that Delgado was positioning himself in a way that was going to slow the elevator process for anyone coming up from the lobby. Not physically, that would be its own problem, but procedurally, the way people who know buildings and know bureaucracy slow things down, which is usually more effective and always more defensible. She sat at the table and looked at the time-stamped document on the screen in front of her, and thought about Serrano, who she had worked with for 2 years before the mission, and who she had trusted in the specific conditional way you trust people in operational environments, which is completely while it's working and then completely differently when it stops. She didn't feel hatred for him. She felt something colder and more durable than hatred, which was the conviction that what he had done was wrong in ways that had specific consequences she intended to make sure were properly documented. Roe had died because Serrano denied her a full kit. That was medical fact. The information Roe had carried had died with him in the official record, protected by a report that described a situation that never existed. And Mara had spent 14 months in a cleaning uniform because the price of knowing what she knew, if it became known that she knew it, was a version of disappearing that she wouldn't have chosen. She was done disappearing. Certification coming through, Vane said. Her voice had a specific quality that was the voice of someone managing their own reaction to something they had worked toward for a long time. IG director signed it at, she checked, 6:58 a.m. Heller was back on her phone immediately, relaying something rapidly to someone at the other end. The elevator down the corridor made its sound. There were 4 of them. She assessed them through the glass wall of the suite, 2 men and 2 women, all in the business casual combination that was field agent default, moving with the pace of people who had an authorization and were prepared to use it. The lead, a man in his 40s with the specific build of someone who did not want to be having this particular morning, reached Delgado at the corridor junction. She could hear the conversation through the glass. Not clearly, but enough. Delgado said something about the certification. The lead said something about the authorization. Delgado said something about the legal precedence of an IG certification over an OVR emergency protocol. The lead was not happy about this, but he was also, she could see, the kind of person who understood when the legal ground had shifted under him and who was checking his phone. It took 4 minutes. The lead came to the glass door of the suite and looked at Mara through it. She looked back. He held up his phone. She couldn't read the screen from here, but she understood the gesture, which was, "I've been told to stand down, and I'm standing down. And I want you to know I want it on the record that I was following a legal authorization that was superseded rather than refusing my original order." She nodded once. He nodded back with the particular expression of someone who has more feelings about a situation than he intends to display at this hour and turned his team around. The corridor emptied. The room released a breath. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the specific way that pressure releases when the threat moves from probable to past, which is gradual and real. Garrett sat back down. He looked at her across the table. "You should have come back 8 months ago," he said. He said it without accusation, just observation. "I know," she said. "I wasn't going to force it." "I know that too." He looked at his hands for a moment. 14 months in an extended stay motel. 3 different cities. One of them was actually 4 blocks from a naval facility. "That was accidental," she said. "Was it?" She thought about it honestly. Partially. He almost smiled. Not quite. The debrief record is in the system. Serrano's legal team is going to have it within the hour, which means his lawyer is going to start making calls this morning. The process from here is long, and it's going to be unpleasant in specific ways that I can brief you on later. He paused. Burr is a separate track. The IG has been building the contractor side independently, and your testimony closes the loop on the authorization chain. She's going to face a federal review that has enough material to be serious. How serious? Criminal referral serious, Vane said from across the table. For Serrano, too. That will take time, Mara said. Yes, Vane said. It will. She understood time. She had been spending it in a very specific way for 14 months and had a pragmatic relationship with how much of it consequential things required. What happens to me in the interim? Garrett and Vane exchanged the kind of look that means a conversation has already occurred about this specific question, and the answer is agreed upon. That depends on what you want, Garrett said. Operationally, you're off suspension effective this morning. The administrative hold from the hospital is superseded by your reinstatement, and the incident report Rourke filed is now subject to a federal review that will effectively freeze any action on it. He paused. The journalist's story is still on hold. The national security flag holds for 30 days. After 30 days, I'm probably not in a position where it matters, she said. That's our assessment too. And Rourke, another look between Garrett and Vane. The hospital's legal team was notified at 6:58 that the incident report is under federal review, Vane said. They've also received documentation that the environmental services employee they suspended yesterday has an active federal status that predates her hospital employment, and that the procedure she performed was within her actual clinical credentials, which are substantially more extensive than her personnel file indicated. How did they take that?
The associate director called our office at 7:03, Vane said. He said, and I'm quoting directly from the note, "Please advise on the appropriate next steps, and also please advise us on how to handle the situation with Dr. Rourke, as this creates a number of concerns we need to address urgently." Mara thought about Whitmore in his office with the folder on the desk and the particular shape of his discomfort. "He's not a bad man," she said. "He was following institutional process." "His process has some significant holes in it," Vane said, "but that's separate from this." "Rourke," Garrett said, returning to it. "What do you want there?" She thought about it. About the hallway in Corridor 7 and the spill outside Bay 4, and the two residents who'd had something interesting on their clipboards when Rourke talked past her like she wasn't there. About Bay 2 and Robert's monitor climbing from 71 to 86. About Rourke's voice saying, "I want her badge pulled," today, while the patient she had just saved was still breathing the first clean breaths. "I want the process to work the way it's supposed to work," she said. "Supplementary incident report alleging false credentials. That's a federal misrepresentation claim, which now has to be reviewed in light of her actual documented status. The medical board gets the timeline and the evidence. Rourke's conduct gets reviewed by the hospital on whatever standard they use." She paused. "I don't need it to be more than that." "That's very measured," Vane said. "It's accurate," Mara said. "Measure it against what he actually did, not what he made me feel. What he did was fail to intubate a patient, panic, and then file a report against the person who fixed it. The legal and professional process handles that. That's what the process is for." Garrett was looking at her with the expression she remembered from early in her career when she had done or said something that matched an assessment he had already made privately. "You've thought about this." "For 14 months, she said. "I had time." Mom. At 8:20, Heller came in with her laptop and set it on the table and showed her something. It was the Kellerton Tribune's website. The story had updated. The original headline, the one about Rourke being hailed as a hero, had been replaced. The replacement was time-stamped 8:07 a.m., under the journalist's name, and it read, "Federal review opens into Hargrove Regional Incident Report. Hospital confirms staff member held federal credentials." The journalist had clearly been awake since the national security flag lifted his original story and started making calls. He had found the federal review before anyone officially told him about it, which was what good journalists did, and he had replaced his hero story with something that had more variables and a more open question at its center. She read the first 3 paragraphs. Her name wasn't in it. Not yet. "He'll get there," Heller said. "I know. The 30-day flag gives us time to—" "I don't think we need the flag," she said. She looked at the story. By the time the flag lifts, the situation will be different enough that the story won't read the same way. Heller looked at her. "You're planning to be visible." "I'm planning to stop hiding," she said, which was different and also the same thing. She pushed the laptop back across the table and stood. She had been sitting in various configurations of chair and vehicle for the last 4 hours, and her back was registering a complaint that she acknowledged but couldn't address immediately. She walked to the window. The city was fully awake now. 7:30 traffic on the street below, the particular density of morning movement that meant people going to jobs and schools and appointments. Ordinary at every frequency, and also not ordinary at all, the way all cities look when you've been in places where cities were not there. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it expecting Theo or Heller, and it was neither. It was a number she recognized after a moment as Priya Okafor's, and the text was short. "I heard what's happening. I don't know all of it. I do know what I saw in Bay 2. If anyone needs me to say that officially, I will." She typed back, "They may ask." "Thank you, Priya." She put the phone in her pocket and stood at the window for another 30 seconds. The door opened behind her. "Mara," Garrett's voice. She turned. He was in the doorway alone, which was a different configuration from the last 2 hours. "There's something you need to see." He was holding a tablet. On it was a document.
She could see from the doorway that it was a formal communication, federal letterhead, multiple signatures at the bottom. "It came in at 8:30, he said. OVR. She crossed the room and took the tablet. It was an OVR internal communication that had been forwarded through channels she was not supposed to have visibility into, which meant someone had decided she should have visibility into it. The document was a memo from OVR's deputy director, time-stamped 8:24 a.m., addressed to Colonel Marcus Marsh. It said, "In the language that formal internal communications use when they are telling someone that their authorization has been rescinded, and that the action they took is now under review, that the emergency variance recovery protocol Marsh had signed at 5:41 a.m. had been determined to be improperly authorized, that the request originating from contractor Elaine Furr had been flagged for review pending investigation, and that Marsh was ordered to stand down all field assets and report to the deputy director's office by 9 a.m. She read it twice. Then she scrolled to the second page. The second page was not part of the memo. It was a separate document attached, which was not standard protocol for an internal OVR communication. It was a personnel file fragment, one page, heavily redacted, with a name at the top that had not been redacted. The name was Colonel David Serrano. Below the name, in one of the unredacted sections, was a single line from an internal review dated 11 months ago. The line read, "Subject's conduct during Operation Meridian Extraction Phase requires further investigation. Recommend holds on current active assignments pending review of after-action discrepancies." Someone at OVR, 11 months ago, had already started to see it, and then the review had stopped. She looked at the date on the hold recommendation, and then at the date of Marsh's emergency protocol authorization this morning, and she understood in the specific way that patterns become visible when you have all the right data points that this was not Furr acting alone and Marsh following her request. Marsh had known. He had known for 11 months that there was an internal flag on Serrano's conduct, and he had been the one who stopped the review. And this morning's field intercept was not his first attempt to manage the Mara Voss problem. It was his latest one. "He buried the internal review," she said. "That's what we believe," Garrett said. "How long have you known? That it was Marsh?" 40 minutes. He looked at her with the specific directness she associated with him. "The person who forwarded that document to us is inside OVR. They've been watching the Serrano situation for 8 months. They forwarded it when Marsh signed the intercept authorization, because that authorization was the confirmation they needed that he wasn't just complicit, he was active." She looked at the name at the top of the personnel file. Serrano. 3 people, she said. Serrano, Furr, Marsh. 3 people, Garrett confirmed. And this document makes the third one visible. "It makes all 3 of them visible," he said, "which is what a complete record does." She put the tablet down on the table, carefully, the way you put something down when you want to be precise about where it lands. The record was complete. 14 months of gray motels and cleaning carts, and a man named Rourke pointing her at spills, and the record that ended all of it was complete and time-stamped and in 3 separate repositories and in the hands of the Inspector General's office. And the 3 people who had built a structure of false documentation to keep it from existing were now visible to every process that would reach them. She should have felt more than she did. She recognized that the flatness she felt was not indifference. It was exhaustion of a very specific kind. The kind that comes at the end of something that has required a lot of sustained effort, which was the effort of staying upright and quiet and unremarkable in places that wanted her to stay that way. "Go get some rest," Garrett said. There will still be things to do at noon," he said, "and at 3, and tomorrow. The process doesn't stop because the documentation is in place." He looked at her steadily. "You've been awake since yesterday morning. Go. We'll call you when we need you." She looked around the room. Vane was on the phone in the corner. Heller was at the table with the laptop. The analyst was filing the formal debrief documentation with the precision of a person who understood that the value of documentation lived entirely in its accuracy. "There's a hotel 2 blocks, Garrett said. "Delgado will take you. Don't use your own card." She picked up her bag, which was still on the floor beside the chair where she had dropped it when she came in. She looked at Garrett. "The 4 months," she said, "when you knew where I was and didn't move on it." "Yes. Thank you for that." He looked at her for a moment. "You would have gotten there.
I might not have, she said, honestly. The thing in Bay 2, that wasn't the plan. No, he said, but it was you. He said it without sentimentality, which was why it landed the way it did. She went to the door. In the corridor, Delgado was waiting. She followed him to the elevator and they rode down to the lobby, and he walked with her through the revolving door and out into the morning. The city was loud and ordinary. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let the noise settle over her. Traffic, voices, someone arguing on a phone 2 storefronts down, a bus making the corner with the specific hydraulic sound buses make. She had her own phone in her hand. She opened Theo Marsh's last message and reread it. The patient from Bay 2, Robert, is asking for a name. His wife said he keeps asking. I told her I didn't know your full name, which is technically true. But if you ever want me to tell him something, I will. She had sent him her name. She didn't know if he had passed it on yet. She typed, "Did you tell him?" The answer came back in under 30 seconds. I told him this morning. He said, "Tell her thank you." His wife cried, "I thought you should know." She put the phone in her pocket. Delgado was watching her with the patience of a person who had been working long enough to know not to rush particular moments. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked the 2 blocks. She was 2 steps from the hotel entrance when her phone rang. Not the device, her actual phone. The screen showed Heller's number. She answered it. "I need you to come back," Heller said. "I've been gone 11 minutes. I know." A pause. "Serrano's lawyer just called the IG's office. He's not contesting the debrief record." She stopped walking. "He's cooperating. His lawyer says he wants to provide a supplementary statement today." Another pause. "And his lawyer mentioned that Serrano has documentation we don't have, records from the mission planning phase that were supposed to be destroyed and weren't." She stood on the sidewalk 10 feet from the hotel entrance and looked at the revolving door and thought about what a cooperating Serrano with undestroyed planning documents meant for the shape of the rest of today. "I'll be there in 2 minutes," she said. She turned around. And her phone, the device, not the personal one, the ruggedized satellite-linked device that she had carried for 14 months through 3 cities and 6 weeks of cleaning carts, vibrated in her jacket pocket. She stopped. It had not vibrated since last night's escalation sequence. She had assumed, given the IG certification and the field intercept stand-down, that it was moving into dormancy. She pulled it out. 1 line of text. No sender. Same format as always. But the content was not a standing-by signal, and not an escalation, and not a contact confirmation. It said, "Meridian was not the first." She stood on the sidewalk and read the line 3 more times. Meridian was not the first. The morning noise continued around her. The bus, the traffic, someone's car alarm half a block down cycling through its sequence. None of it touched the specific quality of stillness that had settled over her, which was the stillness of a person who has just understood that the shape of what they thought they were dealing with is significantly different from the actual shape. Delgado was watching her. He had learned in the last 2 hours to read her silences. "Back to the building," she said. They moved. She typed back to the device as she walked. 2 words. "Confirm source." The response came before she reached the lobby door. "Meridian file attached. Clearance required to open. Garrett has key." She pocketed the device and went through the revolving door at a pace that made Delgado extend his stride to keep up. Elevator. 3rd floor. Glass doors. She came into the conference suite and found it reorganized from when she had left it 11 minutes ago. Vane was off her phone and standing. Heller was at the table with 2 laptops now instead of 1, and Garrett was reading something on the tablet she had set down earlier. He looked up when she came in. She held up the device. He looked at it, then at her face, and his expression shifted into the particular configuration that meant he was doing rapid recalculation. "What did it say?" She told him. She said it flat and direct, the way she reported everything. The room went quiet enough that she could hear the ventilation system. "Meridian wasn't the first," Vane said slowly. "That's what it says." Mara set the device on the table. "It says there's a file attached and that you have the clearance key." Garrett looked at the device for a moment with the expression of someone who is deciding whether a door is one they want to open
and who already knows they're going to open it. He picked up the tablet, entered a sequence she didn't watch because it wasn't hers to watch, and waited. The file opened. She watched his face while he read. She had learned to read Thomas Garrett's face over 20 years at the same reliability she read monitors. The changes were small, the baseline was controlled, and the significant information lived in the variations from that baseline. What she saw while he read was a progressive tightening around his eyes that was not surprise exactly. It was something closer to confirmation of something he had suspected, but not confirmed, which is a different and worse feeling than actual surprise. He read for 4 minutes, then he set the tablet down. "How many of you have seen a patient with the surname Rowe in the last decade?" he said to the room. Vane raised her hand slightly. The analyst across the table said, "Ansel Rowe's son, Nicholas. He was part of a medical intelligence program that was separate from his father's work." "Was," Mara said. "He was removed from the program 14 months ago," the analyst said, "around the same time as Meridian." The timeline hit her like a physical thing. They weren't just protecting what Ansel Rowe told me. They were protecting a second operation that Ansel Rowe's information would have exposed. His son's program, Garrett said, which was run under Serrano's oversight with Furr's contractor support, and which Marsh provided OVR cover for. He looked at her. Meridian was the cleanup, not the operation itself. The operation itself was running for 3 years before Meridian, and it's been running in reduced form for 14 months after it. The reduced form. While she had been in motels, while the record had been suppressed. "It's still active," she said. "The file suggests so," Garrett said. "The file also suggests that the source sending this to us has been inside it, which is how they know." "Who is the source?" Vane said. "I don't know," Mara said. "I've never known who operates the device. It was issued to me before Meridian and I was told to carry it and respond when it contacted me. I assumed it was your side," she said to Garrett. "It's not ours," he said. She looked at the device. In 14 months it had sent her 7 messages, including last night's sequence. All of them had been accurate. All of them had moved her in directions that, looking back, had kept her functioning and unlocated until she was ready to surface on her own terms. She thought about that for a moment. About what it meant that someone had known where she was for 14 months, had known enough to issue accurate intelligence, and had used that access exclusively to keep her safe rather than to extract her. "Whoever it is," she said, "they want this resolved." "Then they should send us more than a file," Heller said, practical and slightly impatient in the way that Heller was practical when the situation required speed, as if in response, and it was not actually in response, it was coincidence, but it felt like something. The device vibrated once more. She looked at it. Serrano's supplementary statement contains Nicholas Rowe's program name. Ask for it specifically. He knows more than he's offered. He's protecting one thing still. She read it aloud to the room. Vane was already on the phone. "I'm calling Serrano's lawyer back," she said. "Right now. Mom." The conversation with Serrano's lawyer took 18 minutes and happened on speaker in the conference suite, which was irregular, but which Vane authorized because the record was already active and adding to it was operationally correct. The lawyer, a man named Pittman, who had the voice of someone who had been practicing crisis law long enough to stop being surprised by the specific shape crises took, opened by restating Serrano's willingness to cooperate. Vane said, "We need the name of the secondary program, the one that preceded Meridian." A pause on the line. Not long. 2 seconds. "My client is prepared to provide that," Pittman said, "in exchange for consideration on the sentencing recommendation." "Your client is already cooperating," Vane said. "Cooperation is the consideration." "The secondary program is a separate matter from—" "The secondary program," Vane said, "is the matter. Your client was managing an operation that ran for 3 years using intelligence assets who didn't know what they were being used for, including at least one who is now deceased. If your client has information about that program and withholds it, we will be discussing obstruction in addition to everything else. If he provides it, we note the full extent of his cooperation." She paused. "You have 2 minutes to talk to him." The line clicked to hold. Mara stood by the window. She was thinking about Nicholas Rowe, a name she hadn't known 40 minutes ago and was now assembling into a shape from fragments. Ansel Rowe's son. Removed from a program 14 months ago, which meant he had been in the program during Meridian, which meant he had known about his father, and the thought of what that knowledge had cost a person was not one she examined for long because it led somewhere she couldn't be useful. The line clicked back. The program is called CASPAR, Pittman said. CASPAR. It was a biomedical intelligence collection program operating under a non-official cover structure run out of a private contractor entity called Viridian Health Analytics. My client states that the program is currently active under a modified structure operating out of a brief pause, paper shuffling. 12 field locations, 3 of which are domestic. The room changed temperature. Domestic, Vane said. That's correct? Your client understands what he's just admitted. My client understands completely, Pittman said. That's why he's saying it now instead of later. The next 2 hours were the kind of hours that don't feel like time passing, because the density of what moves through them compresses the sense of duration. Vane coordinated with the IG's office and 2 other agencies Mara didn't track by name. Heller built a documentation structure for the CASPAR disclosure that would move through the appropriate channels in a legally defensible sequence. Garrett made 3 phone calls, each shorter than the one before, and came back into the conference suite after the 3rd one looking like a man who has done something difficult and necessary. Mara sat at the table and was methodical. She went through everything she had carried in her head for 14 months, and everything Serrano's disclosure had added, and everything the device's file had provided, and she organized it in the way she organized field assessments, not by emotional significance but by operational value, by what each piece contributed to the overall picture and what actions it indicated. CASPAR was the operation that Ansel Rowe had been about to expose. Meridian, the extraction mission, had been designed to fail, not overtly, not in a way that left clear fingerprints, but in the specific way that a field kit gets denied, and a report gets written before the outcome is certain, and a medical specialist gets extracted and quietly erased into an environmental services position in a mid-sized city. The goal had not been to kill her. The goal had been to make her unverifiable. A woman with an inactive CNA license and a cleaning cart, who might know something but who no one with authority would listen to. That was the specific cruelty of it, she thought. Not the violence. She had been prepared for various forms of that. The cruelty was the erasure, the assumption that what she knew could be neutralized by making her the kind of person who wasn't listened to. She had spent 6 weeks being that person. She had felt the specific weight of it, the way Rourke's voice dismissed her, the way residents looked past her in corridors, the way her badge said something that made people's eyes slide away. She had understood it intellectually before Hargrove Regional, but she had not understood it in her body until she lived it. She thought about Priya, who had tightened her jaw in the hallway and hadn't looked away. About Dolores, who had told her Robert's name so that she would know the person she had saved was a person. About Theo, who had filed a statement and texted her because he thought somebody should tell her. These were not dramatic acts, they were small ones. But small acts were the ones that held the structure up when the structure was under pressure, and she had needed them more than she had let herself know at the time. She was still thinking about this when her phone rang, the personal one, a number she didn't recognize, area code she associated with Kellerton. She answered, "Ms. Voss." A woman's voice, careful, warm in the way that people are warm when they are trying to be accurate and kind at the same time and are not sure they can manage both. "My name is Catherine Osei. I'm Robert's wife." Mara was very still. "Yes." "I hope it's okay that I called. Theo, the student, he gave me the number. I told him I wouldn't call unless you'd already given it to him, and he said," a pause. "He said you had, so I'm calling." "It's okay," Mara said. "I wanted..." Another pause, the kind that has weight rather than emptiness. "Robert is being transferred out of the ICU today. They said maybe 3 or 4 more days and he can come home. The doctor explained what happened, the procedure, what you did." Her voice shifted in the specific way that voices shift when they're managing something that is going to come out regardless. "I just wanted to say thank you. Not through someone else. I wanted to say it to you directly." Mara looked at the window. The morning was fully bright now, the early diffuse light replaced by something more definite. "He's going to be okay," she said. It wasn't a question. They think so, yes. He has. Catherine Osei laughed, which was unexpected and real. He has a lot of opinions about his recovery plan. The nurses are finding him challenging. That's usually a good sign, Mara said. I thought so too. A breath. I don't know what you're going through right now. Theo said some things are complicated. I don't need to understand any of it. I wanted you to know that Robert knows your name, and so do I, and we won't forget it. After she ended the call, she sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Garrett, who had come back into the suite and read the room correctly, didn't say anything. After a while, she said, to no one specific, the thing that breaks cover should have been something that ended careers or resolved missions. It was a Tuesday morning airway. Most things are, Garrett said. Boss At 11:40 a.m., the IG's office issued a formal public statement. She wasn't in the room when it went out. She was down the hall in a smaller office with a cup of coffee she had finally allowed herself, and she read it on her phone. The statement was measured in the language that public institutional statements use when they are being precise about something significant, which is the language of very careful nouns and very active verbs and no adjectives that could be challenged. It confirmed that a federal investigation had been opened into the conduct of Colonel David Serrano, retired contractor Elaine Furrer, and Colonel Marcus Marsh in connection with the falsification of after-action documentation from a classified extraction operation. It confirmed that a cooperating witness had provided testimony and documentation. It confirmed that a secondary operation, unnamed publicly but referred to as a biomedical intelligence collection program, was under emergency review, with all domestic field activities immediately suspended. It did not name her. She had been asked whether she wanted to be named in the statement. She had said no. Not because she was afraid of being visible, she was done being afraid of that, and what remained was more like fatigue than fear, but because the statement was about Serrano and Furrer and Marsh, and making it about her would change what the statement did in the world. She wanted the statement to do what it was supposed to do. She watched the news cycle pick it up over the next 40 minutes, the way news cycles pick things up. First the wire services, then the aggregators, then the outlets with context reporters who knew enough to add the relevant background. By 1 p.m., Serrano's name was generating results with headlines that used words like falsified and obstruction and federal charges pending, and Furrer's contractor firm, Viridian Health Analytics, had scrubbed its website, which was the digital equivalent of trying to close a window after the wind had already moved through it. Marsh resigned from his OVR position at 12:47 p.m. The resignation was characterized as voluntary by an OVR spokesperson. Nobody in the conference suite found that characterization persuasive. At 2 p.m., Garrett found her in the small office and sat down across from her with 2 cups of coffee that were better than the one she'd made herself, which told her someone in this building had a separate and superior coffee situation that she had not previously had access to. Rourke, he said. She looked up. Hargrove Regional's legal team has been in contact with the state medical board since 9:30 this morning. The supplementary incident report alleging false credentials has been formally withdrawn by the hospital, pending, he set down his cup, pending a review of Dr. Rourke's conduct in the Bay 2 incident, which was initiated this morning based on witness statements from 3 staff members. 3. Priya Okafor, Theo Marsh, and one of the residents, a Dr. Sandra Nworu, who wrote a separate statement describing Rourke's behavior during the intubation attempt. He paused. Her statement includes the phrase, his hands were visibly shaking before the procedure was abandoned. She used the word abandoned. Mara looked at her coffee. The medical board review isn't a fast process, Garrett said. He'll have representation. The hospital will manage its own exposure. There will be a period where nothing is resolved and everything is uncomfortable. He looked at her carefully. But the record exists. It's documented, it has multiple witnesses, and it's in a process that is very difficult to close without resolution. He was the attending, she said. He was responsible for that bay. He froze. Yes, that's not a personal failure. That's a systemic one. He was in a position he wasn't equipped for in a situation that exceeded what he could do. She thought about it. The system that put him there, that let him operate unchecked, that let him file a report against someone who saved a patient's life, that's what needs the review. You're being very fair to a man who tried to erase you. I'm being accurate, she said. Fairness and accuracy usually end up at the same place. Garrett looked at her for a moment. What do you want to do now? She had been waiting for this question in the specific sense that she had known it was coming and had not let herself think about it directly, because thinking about it directly before the record was in place and the process was moving would have been a distraction, and she couldn't afford distractions. She thought about it now. The Nicholas Rowe question, she said. He was in Caspar. He was removed 14 months ago. What happened to him? Garrett's expression shifted slightly. He's currently at a private medical facility in Maryland. Voluntary admission, from what we understand. The program's removal process was not clean. She had expected something like that and still didn't like it. He needs to know the record is in place, that his father's information wasn't buried permanently. We can arrange for him to be informed through the appropriate, I want to tell him myself, she said. Garrett looked at her. That's not standard. I know. I want to do it anyway. She held his gaze. Ansel Rowe told me 3 things before he died. His son deserves to hear them from the person his father told them to. A long pause. Garrett picked up his coffee, put it down. I'll arrange access. Thank you. And after that, he said, operationally, there are options I want to lay out for you when you're ready. I'm not going back into the field, she said. It came out without deliberation, which meant it had been decided somewhere below the level of deliberation. Not in the way it was before. I'm not saying never. I'm saying that's not what this is. I know, he said. That's not what I'm offering. She waited. There is a training program, he said, field medical integration, specifically the gap between clinical capability and operational deployment, the gap that Meridian exposed, the gap that means a specialist gets sent into a mission without a full kit because the person authorizing the kit doesn't understand what the kit is for. He paused. We've been trying to build a curriculum for that gap for 3 years. We don't have the right person to run it. She thought about Bay 2, about the resident who had moved to grab the kit before Rourke could stop him, not because he had been trained to make that call, but because he was 26 and hadn't yet learned not to. About what it would have meant if that resident had known, understood in his bones, the difference between the airway that required standard intubation and the one that didn't, and had been trained to recognize that difference under pressure. About how many Robert Ossie situations existed in hospitals and field units where no one in the room had the knowledge to fill the gap, and the person who could fill it was pushing a cart in Corridor 7. Who funds it, she said. DOD, with IG oversight given the Casper situation. The oversight is actually useful in this case. It means the program runs with more transparency than the previous structures that led to the problem. How many students? First cohort, 20. Mixed. Field medics, clinical residents, some nursing staff from military hospitals. The goal is to build people who can do what you did in Bay 2 and also understand exactly what the operational context means for a patient's outcome. The curriculum doesn't exist yet, she said. That's why we need the person who would build it, he said. Not someone who would follow an existing curriculum. Someone who would start from the actual problem and work backward. She looked at the window. Afternoon light now, different from morning. I need to go to Maryland first, she said, and I need a week after that. Not decompression. I need to think clearly before I make this decision, and right now I'm not thinking clearly because I haven't slept properly and the last 24 hours have had a lot of variables. That's entirely reasonable, he said, and if I do it, she said, I want full control over the curriculum design. No committee approvals on content. I'll take input, I'll use review, but I'm not building something by consensus. Agreed. And I want Theo Marsh to know about it, she said. He's a third-year student with good instincts and the specific quality of not freezing when a situation exceeds the expected script. If he wants to be involved as a student in the first cohort, I'd like that option available to him. Garrett looked at her for a moment. The student who filed the statement. He did the right thing when it was easy not to, she said. That's what I want in the room. She went to Maryland 4 days later. The facility was the kind of place that described itself as a recovery center, and was that without euphemism. A quiet building on a lot with mature trees, the kind of environment that was designed with the understanding that external noise was not what its residents needed. She had been cleared for a supervised visit, 45 minutes, seated. Nicholas Rowe was 32. He looked younger and older than that simultaneously, which was the specific combination that certain experiences produce. He was thin in the way of someone who had been thinner and was coming back from it. He sat across from her in a room with 2 chairs and a window and no furniture between them, which she thought was probably intentional. She had thought on the drive about how to start. She had not found a version she was satisfied with, which meant she was going to have to start without one. "My name is Mara Voss," she said. "I was the combat medic on Meridian. I was with your father when he died." He looked at her. His eyes were his father's eyes. She recognized them from the mission photograph she had studied before insertion, and it was a strange thing to recognize something in a living face that you had first seen in an operational file. "I know who you are," he said. "They told me before you came." "Okay. Did he—" He stopped, started again. "Was he in pain?" At the end, "No," she said. It was true. The hemorrhage had moved the way it moved, and the last 15 minutes had been, medically, a loss of consciousness rather than an escalation of distress. "He was in pain before that, yes. I managed what I could manage in the field. But if you'd had the right equipment—" She looked at him directly. "I don't know. The internal bleeding was significant. What I can tell you accurately is that the denial of the kit reduced his chances, and that reduction was not an accident." She paused. "He knew he was dying before he lost consciousness. He was clear." Nicholas Rowe's jaw moved once. "He told me 3 things," she said. "I've put them into the federal record, but I wanted to tell them to you directly because he said them to another person, not to a document, and I think there's a difference." She looked at him. "Can I tell you?" He nodded. She told him. All 3. She said them in the order Ansel Rowe had said them, in the field language his father had used, which was direct and not embellished. The first was about Caspar and what it was, which Nicholas already knew from his own involvement. The second was about the specific information that Serrano and Furr had been protecting, which Nicholas had suspected but not confirmed. The third was not operational. The third was that Ansel Rowe had said his son's name. He had said, "Tell Nicholas I knew what they were doing to him and I was trying to fix it." He had said it clearly and he had meant it to be carried. Nicholas Rowe looked out the window for a long time. She let him. When he looked back, his eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. He was the kind of person who felt things in his face before he felt them in his body, and he was managing both. "He was trying to get me out," he said. "The program. That's why he agreed to the extraction. He thought if he got to the right people, he could—" "Yes," she said. "I know." And instead, Serrano controlled who the right people were," she said. "Until now." He was quiet for a moment. "Is it over?" "The program. Caspar is suspended. The domestic operations were shut down within 6 hours of the disclosure. The international sites are in a more complex legal position, but the IG has them in active review." She paused. "It will take time. The process takes time, but it's in a process now that is real and documented and has enough oversight that burying it again would require too many people to agree to bury it." "Serrano," he said. "Furr, Marsh, all 3 are facing federal proceedings. The charges are being filed in stages because the evidence is coming through multiple channels, but the direction is clear." She looked at him steadily. "Your father's information is in the record. It's corroborated. It's the piece that connects the 3 of them to Caspar in a way that isn't circumstantial." "He didn't die for nothing," Nicholas said. He said it with the specific flatness of someone checking something that they have needed to check for a long time. "No," she said. "He didn't." He nodded. Once. Then he looked at her with something that was not gratitude exactly, more like the acknowledgement of a debt that can't be repaid, and both parties understand this, and the understanding is enough. "What happens to you?" he said. "I'm going to build something," she said. She called Theo Marsh on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Kellerton, from an apartment she had rented with a lease in her actual name for the first time in 14 months. The apartment was in a neighborhood she had chosen because it was a reasonable commute from the facility where the curriculum program would be housed, and for no other reason, which was a new way to choose a place to live. He picked up on the second ring. "Mara." He sounded like he had been awake for a while already. She remembered he was a third-year student and revised her estimate of how long he'd been up. "How are you doing?" she said. "Busy, Rourke's review is still going. The hospital is being careful about everything now, which means 3 times as much paperwork. A pause. How are you doing? Better than I was, she said. I'm calling for a professional reason. Okay. She explained the program. She kept it precise. What it was, who it served, what the first cohort looked like, what she would need from a participant who was willing to function as both student and early feedback channel on the curriculum design. She told him it wasn't a fellowship, and it wasn't a research position, and it wasn't going to help his residency application in any official capacity, though the learning would be significant. There was a pause on the line. Is this because I filed the statement? He said. No, she said. It's because I watched you see what needed to be done in a situation that was over your head, and you did it anyway. The statement was confirmation, not cause. Another pause. I have to finish my 3rd year, he said. I know, the first cohort doesn't start for 4 months. I'm building the curriculum now. 4 months. She could hear him thinking. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know the answer, but someone who is counting something. I think I can manage it. Think about it, she said. You don't have to decide today. I've already decided, he said. I just wanted to make sure you knew I thought about it. She almost smiled. I'll send you the program overview next week. Okay, a pause. Mara. Yes, I heard about Rowe, Ansel Rowe, and what Serrano did. I don't know all the details, but he seemed to be choosing words the way people choose words when they're trying to say something real without tipping into something hollow. I'm sorry that happened to you, the 14 months, all of it. She looked out her window. New neighborhood, trees she didn't know the names of yet. I'm not, she said. You're not. I spent 14 months in places that showed me something I wouldn't have known how to see otherwise. I know what it feels like to be the person no one looks at. I know what that does to what you're able to do, and what it takes away, and where it breaks down. She paused. I'm going to spend the next part of my career teaching people to fill that gap. I needed to know what the gap actually felt like from the inside to do it right. A long silence. That is, Theo said, either the most rational thing I've ever heard or the most irrational thing, and I can't tell which. Probably both, she said. Chem. The program started on a Tuesday in October in a room that was not dramatic. Fluorescent lights, long tables, a whiteboard, 20 people who had come from different corners of the same general problem and who did not yet know each other or know what the next 6 weeks would ask of them. Mara stood at the front of the room and looked at them. 20 people. Field medics, clinical residents, nursing staff from 3 military hospitals, 2 people from a federal emergency response unit, and 1 third-year medical student who was sitting in the second row and had shown up 11 minutes early. She thought about what to say. She had written 3 different opening statements and discarded all of them because they were all too shaped, too aware of what she was supposed to say in a room like this to begin a program like this. She set down the folder she had been carrying and left it closed. I want to tell you how this started, she said. Not the program, the thing the program is trying to fix. She told them about Hargrove Regional. She told them about Bay 2, and about Robert Osei, and about what it had cost to walk through that door. She didn't tell them everything. Some of it was still classified, some of it was still in proceedings, and some of it was not theirs to carry into this room. But she told them enough. She told them about standing in corridor 7 with a cleaning cart, watching through a window at a patient dying in a room full of people who couldn't save him. The gap this program is built to close, she said, is not a technical gap. The technique exists. Most of you have it or will have it by the time you finish here. The gap is the space between knowing how to do something and being able to do it in a room where the hierarchy says you can't, or where the noise is too loud, or where the person who's supposed to be in charge has frozen and everyone is waiting for permission that isn't coming. She looked at the room. 20 faces. Some of them were already leaning forward. The patients who die in that gap, she said, don't die because we didn't know. They die because we hesitated, because we waited for the person above us to do the thing they couldn't do, because we had been so trained to stay in our lane that we forgot the lane only matters when everyone inside it is functioning. She picked up a marker and turned to the whiteboard. We are going to spend the next 6 weeks breaking that, she said. Not the hierarchy. The hierarchy is real, and it matters. But the paralysis. The deference that becomes inaction. The waiting. She wrote one word on the whiteboard. Not a technique, not a procedure. Judgment. Everything else, she said, is practice. After the session, when the room had filtered out and Theo was the last one to leave, he had stayed to help stack chairs, which she had not asked him to do and which she noted. She stood at the whiteboard alone and looked at the words she had written. She thought about Ansel Rowe saying his son's name in a field that smelled like smoke and wet grass, 11 minutes before he died. She thought about Robert Osei Satie's climbing from 71 to 86 on a monitor in a room where nobody expected her to be. She thought about Dolores telling her Robert's name so she would know he was a person. About Priya's jaw in the hallway. About Theo's text, "Somebody should tell you." She thought about 14 months of being invisible, and the specific education of that, which she would not have chosen and would not undo. She erased the word on the whiteboard, not because she was done with it, because it had been for the room, for the opening, and now it was hers again, internal, where it had always lived. She put the cap on the marker. She picked up her folder and her jacket, and she walked out into the hallway, which was ordinary and fluorescent lit and smelled like industrial cleaner, and she felt, for the first time in a very long time, exactly like herself. The quietest people in the room are not always waiting for permission. Sometimes they are waiting for the moment when permission stops mattering. What you know is yours. What you can do is yours. No one who dismisses you is capable of taking that away. They can only make it harder to remember. The moment you remember is the moment everything changes. Not for them, for you. And from there, for everyone who needed you to.